didn't see you. Hey, Wendy.
We're going to get started so we can get in as much information.
We still need to finish it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thank you guys all for coming. This is a public involvement plan meeting for the East Deerfield Rail Yard, and this meeting is specifically going to address the lake asphalt portion of the property, which is just off of River Road in Deerfield. This meeting is to present a draft Phase 4 remedy implementation plan, which is, I'll go into the regulatory framework that this report falls under, but it's a report that's required under the state of Massachusetts environmental regulations that will provide all of the details regarding how the remedy for soil and groundwater contamination at the site will be implemented. So all of the specifics, right from what will entail, health and safety concerns, residential concerns, all of that will be in this document and are in this draft document for comment now. After this meeting, there'll be a 20-day public comment period, and if anyone has any questions during that time frame, feel free to contact myself or Dana Banks, whose contact information is the last slide in this, on the back page of this PowerPoint presentation. You can also contact Lynn, and she can relay any concerns.
I just hate to interrupt you, but
no, you can interrupt.
You're wonderful, you guys. But maybe you could introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sure. I just rolled right into it. Sorry. My name is Lindsay Colburn. I'm from Environmental Resources Management. It's a consulting firm that was hired by the railroad to help them work through the regulatory process and get the site cleaned up under the regulations. And this is John Drabinski, the licensed site professional, working as well for ERM on behalf of the railroad. So that's actually a good segue into the Massachusetts regulations for those of you who haven't heard me give this spiel a bunch of times before. In the state of Massachusetts, there's a very prescribed regulatory process that a site, once it is identified to be contaminated, has to go through a very prescribed step-by-step process for investigating the release and the extent of contamination, documenting that, then going through a feasibility evaluation to select what remedies might be most appropriate for the site. And then we provide a Phase 4, which is the details of that remedy, and then the site gets closed once that remedy is implemented. So I've got a couple of slides in here that what I just said quickly is on slide 3, and then the details of what this document is all about are a little further along. Does everyone want a little history on the site itself?
You know what? I think it would be very nice, just in case people haven't been following.
Certainly, yeah.
And this is our new selectman, Dave Wolfram. So this is relatively new. For him.
So
I know the site well.
Okay. So there's slides in here that provide some of the background. So there's
that public.
So just very briefly, the site was leased a number of years ago to a company called Lake Asphalt, and they had storage tanks of liquid asphalt and other petroleum materials at the site during that time. The site was abandoned, likely sometime in the 70s, and then in 2007, DEP visited the site and noted that some of those abandoned storage tanks were leaking. So at that time, in 2007, 2008, Pan Am contracted with ERM as well as another consulting firm, ATC, and did some immediate response actions. And those are response actions at the site that can happen just to abate the immediate concern, to stop whatever is leaking and to control any source that's at the site that might be a problem for exposure to nearby residents. So ATC was hired to do an asbestos abatement, and they went through a separate process permitted by DEP and removed asbestos that had been detected on the boilers and some piles that had fallen off of piping and things like that. So that was done in 2008 in accordance with the Bureau of Waste Prevention permit. ERM did immediate response action reporting. Pan Am had all of the tanks pumped out, their contents were evaluated and transported off-site for recycling or disposal. At that time, we also did extensive soil excavation. There was soil at the site that was grossly impacted with the liquid asphalt It doesn't move very fast, but when it's hot, you tend to see it sort of migrate out the side walls of an excavation. So that was sort of an iterative process to try to get all of that. And so now what we are...
There was also lead and asbestos in the soil, right?
Yes. So because of those immediate response actions, the site was in the system, so to speak. So it's in the system for those petroleum releases, liquid asphalt. The asbestos was also a reported release, so any asbestos that's detected at the site now has to be dealt with under this set of regulations that we're dealing with. And during the course of site investigation activities, it was determined that there's extensive coal ash at the site, which has resulted in lead impacts in soil. So the lead impacts at the site are ubiquitous because they're everywhere, because they were brought in, fill was brought in, and that fill contained ash. And the ash, therefore, has some petroleum aromatic hydrocarbons, which are sort of petroleum constituents. It's what you would see in like charcoal. The black is the petroleum aromatic hydrocarbons, as well as lead. So those are sort of all over in soil at the site. And then we've also got some petroleum compounds that can be attributed to other sources, the liquid asphalt and operations at the site. And we've also got asbestos in soil at a very low percentage. So it's sort of a tricky situation with the asbestos because it's not technically asbestos-containing material. So it's less than 1% asbestos. It's 0.25% asbestos. But asbestos is a tricky thing to deal with, and there's no acceptable amount of asbestos. So we are going to address that as well as the petroleum and lead impacted soil at the site.
It's particularly important because asbestos, when it circulates and can settle, and becomes airborne. Yeah. Isn't there mercury in ash as well?
There can be. I think it really depends on what type of coal, what the source coal is, what the concentrations of different contaminants can be. There can be arsenic in it as well, but we don't have that at this site.
Good.
So I've gone through the history a bit.
Brownfield.
It is.
Well, yeah, because it can be redeveloped, so it is a brownfield, yeah.
So yeah, and that's actually something that we considered.
One thing's even worse than a brownfield.
It's a hazardous waste
So
site.
much stuff.
Yeah, there was like,
Fun.
how many tanks were there? There were like
There were 20 permanent above ground storage tanks, and then drums.
Drums, yes.
Yeah,
There were a lot of drums.
It was
lot
the
of drums.
drums. I thought it was the drums that were the major problem.
Yeah, and actually that's not what we found. It was the liquid asphalt tanks that really were the problem because they had leaked over the years. Most of the drums were empty. So we did extensive site investigation over the years at this site, which is relatively small in terms of area. I think it's less than 2 acres. And we've got close to, I think, 50 soil borings across the site, including excavation confirmatory samples. And through that investigation, we determined that groundwater actually meets the regulatory criteria, and there's no risk currently from exposure to groundwater. That includes discharge to surface water. We tested surface water upgradient and downgradient of the site and didn't find any site contaminants in the groundwater, in the surface water, sorry.
And can I say why we were really concerned about that is there's 2 culverts that go under that site into the other end of they come out the outfalls at the other side.
Yeah.
So we were watching to see if there were any contaminants that were here that were coming out in the outfalls. Because we didn't know how well those conduits under the site were actually how well contained they were.
Yeah, because a lot of it is old infrastructure,
Yeah.
brick. But at this site, you've actually got a stream that comes off of the hill across the street and
Yeah.
gets culverted and goes right under the site. And so we sampled upgradient and downgradient, that surface water, and didn't find any site contaminants. So as I mentioned, groundwater was not an issue currently and in the future for any potential future uses. There's no risk based on the groundwater concentrations that we're seeing. Now, I should caveat that and say in Massachusetts, you don't have to, if the site isn't currently used and is not designated for future use as a drinking water source area, you don't have to meet the drinking water criteria everywhere. So this site doesn't meet drinking water criteria, but it meets the other criteria that have been established in the MCP.
I'd just like to clarify, it is actually a potentially productive aquifer, but the reason it doesn't have to meet drinking water standards, it's an industrially zoned site, so it's exempt. But the reality is it is over a potentially productive aquifer that's been contaminated on the other side from the railroad. So even though it doesn't have to meet drinking water standards on this side, it's only because it's exempt. The other side, would it meet drinking water standards if it had to?
No.
Okay, that's good.
No, you
I'm
couldn't.
not exactly sure where this is, to be honest with
Oh,
you. In
it's
terms of like the
River Road.
River Road and
This
Railroad.
is where all those, remember those buildings and abandoned
Yeah,
buildings were and they're
figure one
gone
sort of
now?
shows
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
it, that's
okay.
it.
Just
look
right
at-
along that little side
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Okay, that's right.
yeah.
I gotcha.
I know where it is.
That's
There it is,
sort
right
of
here.
the overview.
Go
It's
by
right
there every
across from
day.
residents is why it's so important in terms
There's
of.
a residence right across the street from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're trying to get this taken care of.
Yep.
Or
Yeah.
Lynn's been so really good about this.
Support.
So, as I mentioned, we did extensive site investigation activities, and what we determined in the phase 2, which is the comprehensive site assessment, is that we are looking at concentrations of lead, petroleum aromatic hydrocarbons from the coal ash, some residual petroleum hydrocarbons from the liquid asphalt, and asbestos in soil. And those compounds are present at concentrations that would present a risk to some receptors, not all. So the remedy that we are implementing at the site,
A receptor is a person or wildlife or.
exactly,
Or certain-
exactly, and in Massachusetts, when you do a risk characterization, like we did at the site-specific risk characterization, you have to look at current and potential future uses. You can't eliminate that this site could potentially in the future become a daycare or a residential condominium complex. So when you do your risk characterization, you have to consider somebody might grow vegetables in their backyard at this site. So all of those things were considered in the risk characterization. And the conclusion of the risk characterization was that for a commercial or industrial future user or a trespasser in the future or currently, the site does not pose an unacceptable risk. So the concentrations are below a threshold that would pose a risk to a commercial worker.
Oh, okay, so it's
Commercial.
an occupational? So
Yes.
it's not
So it's an-
occupational hazard?
And it comes down to sometimes the exposure duration, like if you're there 8
Yeah.
hours a day and you're wearing your health and safety gear, that's different than somebody who's gardening in their backyard and then living in that house 24 hours a day. So a residential use, on the other hand, would pose an unacceptable risk. So for this site, under current conditions, there is no risk to a trespasser or a railroad worker that might be at the site, shuffling around in the soil. But if the site were to be developed for residential use, that would be an unacceptable risk.
Good. Wendy.
Does the yard factor into the new rail route in any way in terms of refueling, or are you aware of
I
that?
don't think it does.
Which would be a passenger route. So.
Yeah, I don't think that it does. Because
It could,
it's,
we're just not
it's-
aware of it. That's
Yeah,
all.
I'm not aware of it, and as far as I've ever seen at the rail yard, they're Pan Am locomotives or Springfield Terminal locomotives, and I don't think any of those would be pulling any of the passenger cars, so.
Because the passion, Amtrak, right? Amtrak,
Yeah.
Amtrak. Yeah. They may, as you know, the railroads have right-of-ways over everyone's track, so they may be using the track through their yard, but I don't think Amtrak would be refueling there.
Yeah, I
Doesn't
don't
seem
think
like they
there'll be an
would.
increase in fueling at the yard because of it. So
The
after,
fueling's on the other side of the yard.
Fueling's on the other side, down on
is, yep.
McCollum Farm Road, yeah.
so after we did that comprehensive site assessment and the risk characterization, we determined something has to be done at the site. We need some form of remediation to abate that potential future risk. So we did a phase 3, which is basically a feasibility evaluation. You look at a bunch of alternatives. We looked at everything from digging up the whole site to treating it, to putting a cap over the whole site. We also considered institutional controls, like a deed restriction. And so when you do a phase 3, you consider all kinds of things like implementability. How could we get this done at this tiny site? What are the public's concerns about this site? What's the cost of it going to be? Has it ever been implemented for this contamination at another site, and was it successful there? So there's a lot of criteria that go into selecting the remedy. And that was presented back in October, I think. the process that we went through in order to arrive at the remedy that we did. So ultimately, the remedy has two components. One component, which would address the lead, PAHs, and other petroleum constituents in soil, is an activity and use limitation, or a deed restriction. So that would be on the deed to the property in perpetuity, and it would restrict certain future uses like residential or school or daycare from being constructed at the site. The other component, and it would also include maintaining the fence to restrict trespasser access. The other component is capping the asbestos-impacted soils. And on figure 4 of the, actually, the asbestos cap area is on all of the figures and the attachments, but figure 4 shows the full extent of it.
Oh, this one.
Yes, of the main report. Does everyone have a copy?
Is there an extra copy of the report?
Yes, absolutely.
That would be
Yep, it's the very
fantastic.
last page has the good figures. Anyone else need a copy?
So I guess my just question right off the top is,
Oh, figure 4.
you were going to do a cap, soil cap of the asbestos area.
Yeah.
How much, what's the percentage of coverage for the asbestos area? Is that like 100%?
Yes, so we have soil samples from this eastern portion of the site that indicate that's where it's limited to. The rest of the site is mainly paved, except where we excavated.
Okay.
So this eastern portion, this unpaved portion of the site is where the cap would be placed.
Okay, so the extent of the soil cap is
It's
the
right there.
100% coverage?
Exactly.
Yes. Yep, and the cover would consist, and we relied on a number of different regulatory guidance documents from EPA and from DEP to design the cap and figure out what thickness would be acceptable in this circumstance. It's a little bit unique because typically when you cap something, you want to prevent rainwater from infiltrating it. But asbestos doesn't migrate like that. It's not a groundwater issue. So we didn't propose any
No
barrier
contacting.
like that. It's just soil. So rainwater can still infiltrate it. So the goal of this cap is to prevent exposure to it and prevent it from being mobilized to the air. So the cap consists of 14 inches of clean soil cover and then 6 inches on top of that of topsoil to support growth. And it also includes a...
Wow.
Yeah, so it has to stay vegetated, and that's part of the function of the cap. The vegetation keeps the soil in place over the asbestos.
So there's no other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just had a question on, what do you intend to plant with it?
It would probably just be an herbaceous, so no woody species, no shrubs, trees. It would be a grass mix. And really, they could plant whatever, if the public strongly...
If you want wildflowers,
I was
we could
just
do
going to
that.
say, it would
Typically
be
turf,
really-
but we could do...
If you could do
it's a small
perennial
enough area. Yeah.
wildflowers. Well, if you could do,
Well, that's up to the town. You guys may have a dispensary, I don't know.
if you could do perennial
We have a prohibition on
Yeah.
flowers,
Huh?
that would be good for, birds or whatever.
Yeah, we could use a
butterflies.
habitat mix,
But,
certainly.
yeah, habitat mix.
Yeah.
But what I was concerned about was just something that would be no maintenance, but would be, self-perpetuating and, not just
Yeah.
be weeds that.
We own it? The town owns it?
No,
No, I'm asking them.
Yeah.
because it's not likely to get a lot of maintenance.
Yeah, that's
No,
why.
there's going to be no maintenance
Right,
problem.
but
So
it's
we
hard
want to
to-
have a perennial,
No, well, so if
We
you
could do
put
that. We could
perennial
do that.
wildflowers in it, it would be self-perpetuating, and they're enough, they would keep rubbish,
You'd
the,
have to like mow it once a year, otherwise you'd have woody
Yes,
growth.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so
Every
that's
once in a while, you
actually
go
part of
on
the
Mass
deed
Pike, DOT
restriction
has
is the
those
maintenance.
wildflower areas.
right. But if if it's a once-a-year deal or twice-a-year deal,
Yeah.
you can mow it, you'd keep the sumac out, but it would also, it would be
Yeah,
habitat
definitely.
enhancing, but not, we wouldn't have any issues with
Yeah.
other stuff.
Definitely.
It would keep poison ivy out, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that we're looking
Okay.
Yeah.
to try to maintain.
This is the area where you found the asbestos.
Yes.
That surprises me.
Well, there was tanks, heating tanks.
The tanks are
Yes.
over this side.
They were all the dashed lines on here are tanks.
There was a boiler over here. There was
Squares,
a boiler
there's
here.
tanks.
There were
But they
tanks
did
here.
some soil removal, that's why some of the asbestos isn't there.
Yeah, ATC did a
See the
removal of all the
stippled area?
asbestos,
That's all
including
soil that
surface
was dug
soil.
up. That's all gone.
So I I think my understanding is that this is the last area that hasn't been removed.
That was
correct.
never excavated,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, so wait, okay.
It was removed in terms of surface piles and surface soil right under the piles, but there was never an extensive excavation like we did in this whole area over here.
Can I ask you why? I'm just curious.
Because under the way that it was written, the permit from Bureau of Waste Prevention was that they could do field monitoring while they were removing asbestos and contaminated soil. And so their field monitor told them there wasn't any asbestos left, probably because, yeah, I mean, we have 0.25%,
The other
which
issue
is the
was
laboratory
that
detection
the
limit.
asbestos removal was done
Yeah.
under the Bureau of Waste Prevention, but once that was done, then waste site cleanup came in. As Lindsay said, waste site cleanup doesn't have any standards for,
For outside, asbestos
in the soil.
outside,
There's
yeah.
There's no way to
criteria.
do a risk assessment for it either.
Right, I see.
So
I
a
remember
detect
that.
of asbestos, one asbestos fiber in the soil means you have to do something. So that's,
Inside a building is 1%.
It's a
so
whole
it's
different thing.
Lower that
Right, so
outside,
technically,
wow.
this soil wouldn't have to go to an asbestos landfill even,
it's
Oh,
because
wow.
it's not
It's not even, it's less than
asbestos
1%.
material.
Yeah.
It's what, 0.25?
0.25.
That's low.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really low.
It's the detection limit, basically.
Unfortunately, we
You
have
gotta
to
wrap it
start a
up.
selectmen's meeting, but, I mean, does that sound like it's okay with you, Lynn, and everybody?
Yeah, I'd like to actually move the meeting in there. I mean, people don't have to stay. I'd like a little more information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
Do you mind
I
if we do that?
Yeah, no, not at all. And if you, like I said, it's a public comment period, so if you have any questions, contact me or Lynn.
You
and-
know, like I said, it would be nice to have a perennial.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's
I think that's a very doable thing.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be pretty, but, you know, really what it is we want to keep poison ivy out.
Yeah.
No, that's doable.
Keep it stable, as long as we can
Sign
keep it
that.
stabilized.
Sign it.
This is the end of the meeting?
No, we're going to go.
They're gonna
You can
go in
leave
the
if
other
you want, but
What
we're
power
going to
does the
go.
town
we're
have
gonna start a
to
selectmen's
insist
I
that
just had
Pan
a
Am
couple
take
more
care of
questions,
that
so
property?
it's up to you if you want to stay.
Lynn,
Power is through the
I'm happy
public
with
process, we're going right through here, and
Yeah.
also we have to
Well,
meet the statutory requirements
other
of
question
the
is
Massachusetts
really
contingency
about
plan.
there's no
So that's what we're doing here.
Tim is
So
the
we
soil
have to
would
comply
migrate.
with that
Because
statute.
At first, they were talking about asphalting.
So
but
we-
this
It's
is-
very, very prescriptive of what we need to
So
do.
if it's permeable and there's a
Like, just
pool to
like,
migrate, that's what I want.
Okay.
Selectman
That's
Shores and I
what
said, we want to,
Because there was lead and other things in the soil.
perennial mix, we can do that, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Just, like I said, just to keep it stable and
Yeah, that's not a
Oh,
problem.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
keep the
Oh,
poison
yeah,
ivy
okay.
down and stuff
So I'll
like
work
that,
with
because
them
we have
to
a lot
get
of
a
issues
schedule
with
and
poison
then I'll
ivy.
have.
I mean, it's so
Laura-
I have scarred from poison
Just
ivy.
like
These
you
are my
and your
poison
plant,
ivy
you have to
scars
meet
from last
certain
summer.
regulatory thresholds
I
for your
despise
emissions
it.
and things you do.
Well, we're trying,
Storage, SPC.
you know, it's so invasive, and we're trying to keep
Okay,
it
you know
down.
what, I'm happy.